Hello friends, welcome back to our brown leather couch here in the Midtown Manhattan Bleacher Report studios, where we have been locked in on all the developments around the NBA. Today, Tuesday, February 3rd, coming to you live 5 p.m. Eastern time, just under 46 hours away from the trade deadline buzzer sounding on Thursday's mid-season marketplace. All across the league, we still have the massive domino of Giannis Antetokounmpo's future looming over everything. We've had some blockbusters all across the league. Before we get into today's rundown, though, I just want to clarify yesterday's comments about LeBron James and the Los Angeles Lakers that definitely got blown out of proportion. To me, the fact that LeBron is entering unrestricted free agency this summer, the expiring contract that he's on with Los Angeles, there is no direct indication that either the Lakers or LeBron are definitively closing the door on their marriage and their partnership that's lasted for almost a decade now and achieved the 2020 NBA championship together. I do think, though, that the reality is both sides are preparing and understanding that this relationship could be coming to an end beyond this season. So anything that was taken to be a definitive closure to what's been a long dynamic there was definitely taken out of proportion. But there definitely is a very close likelihood, a real likelihood right now, that the long-time relationship between the Los Angeles Clippers and James Harden is potentially coming to a close between now and Thursday's trade deadline. There was absolutely an earthquake of rumblings around the league, from rival front offices to agents and all kinds of front office executives yesterday, all day Monday. I was working on it well into the evening, and then news certainly broke that James Harden and the Clippers are working together to find a new landing spot and a new situation for the 11-time All-Star, the 36-year-old point guard, who has had an All-Star caliber season this year as well, but has a unique contract structure with the Clippers where he has a team option, or a player option, for next season, but it's only guaranteed for $13 million. So the Clippers and Harden's side of this have always been explaining this contract, which he signed this summer. So it allows him a one-year bird opportunity, which essentially gives Harden not a no trade clause, but veto rights to any possible trade that could occur this season. So because of that, James Harden and the Clippers have always been kind of navigating the dynamic and trying to understand what exactly his trade market could look like, because of the option for both of them to basically get out of this 1.5 year kind of hedge agreement that they came to. For the Clippers side, they did not want to commit longer than 2 years to James Harden because they have been signaling loud and clear that Los Angeles wants to be a factor in 2027 free agency. So not this summer, but next summer. And because of that, James Harden knows that there isn't exactly a guarantee of long-term money in Los Angeles for him next year and beyond. And James Harden wants to be able to find a contract situation beyond next season. And he knows that the Clippers, despite this magical 16-3 run that they put together over 19 games to claw back into the play-in picture, he knows that Los Angeles is not a championship contender by any stretch in a Western Conference that features the reigning champion Oklahoma City Thunder, Victor Wembanyama and the San Antonio Spurs, perhaps the Minnesota Timberwolves and Giannis Antetokounmpo joining Anthony Edwards. We'll talk about all that as we continue to sift through today's news. But for now, to just kind of round things out to a close on the James Harden dynamic, my sources have absolutely confirmed that James Harden has his eyes set on the Cleveland Cavaliers, and there is a potential framework coming together that would swap James Harden with the Cavs' former All-Star guard, Darius Garland. I don't know if this deal is going to get done. Both the Clippers, both the Cavs, and Harden's representation, as well as Garland's representation at Clutch Sports, have all left open the door for this to not come to fruition. And at that point in time, the Cavaliers are, I think, going to look at Garland just like the New York Knicks are with Karl Anthony Towns and consider, okay, How did our playoff run fare? How far did we get in the Eastern Conference? Did we make it to the finals? And what does that mean for Karl-Anthony Towns? What will that mean for Darius Garland in Cleveland? No matter what, the Cleveland Cavaliers backcourt and this franchise altogether is centered around and orbiting around Donovan Mitchell. He will be extension eligible this summer himself. So the Cavaliers absolutely need to set themselves up for a major playoff push this spring that will convince and continue to indicate to Donovan Mitchell that Cleveland, which, remember, was not a spot that Mitchell originally wanted to go to, they're going to need to do what they can to continue to show Mitchell that this is a place he can compete for a title for years to come. They have not gotten out of the second round. So for that, this is going to be a situation that we're monitoring all the way through the finish of the trade deadline. But I can definitively tell you that James Harden has an eye on the Cleveland Cavaliers, which, let's be clear, is important again because not only does James Harden have veto rights on any trade, which allows him and his representation to play some type of facilitation here and influence where his outcome would be, but also all throughout James Harden's career, aside from when Oklahoma City traded him to Houston, Harden has basically picked his destination and had his eye on a specific landing spot before he ever broached a trade concept to whatever team he was previously employed by. When he was in Houston, he looked at Brooklyn and Philly. When he got to Brooklyn, he told them, I want to go to Philly. When he was in Philly, he said, trade me to the Clippers. So now he is looking at the Cavaliers. Last two things here before we keep moving. Earlier in the year, Harden definitely had his eye on Atlanta. That was back during the Hawks time period. They were figuring out the trade landscape for Trae Young. Of course, that situation has already moved on with Trae Young in Washington. And the Hawks in general are no longer aggressively pursuing major win-now moves now that they have kind of really crashed back down to reality and they're more in the thick of the play-in tournament compared to trying to compete for home court in the Eastern Conference. So along those lines, we're also still hearing that Atlanta is no longer considered a real landing spot for Anthony Davis either. The other team to monitor here for James Harden that he has his eyes set on, that he would be intrigued to join and definitely would waive any veto right for, would be the Minnesota Timberwolves. However, we are being told very consistently that the Minnesota Timberwolves are not actively pursuing James Harden because they are very much aggressively pursuing Giannis Antetokounmpo from Milwaukee. So that will bring us to our update on all things Greek Freak as the Bucks continue to sift through interest from the Timberwolves, the Miami Heat, the Golden State Warriors. The New York Knicks are always, of course, going to be linked to this situation as well. We've been talking about Portland trying to get in the mix of things, being that they own Milwaukee's draft capital from 2028 to 2030. I don't really think the Blazers have a chance. As you see on this Chiron, we've been reporting very consistently, and I have been given no indication otherwise that Giannis does not have any true desire in sticking around Portland long-term, despite his connection to Damian Lillard, despite his connection to Drew Holiday, his former teammate who was traded for Damian Lillard. And they're both, of course, now in the Blazers backcourt. Lillard rehabbing from that torn Achilles that ended the Bucks season all but last year in the playoffs. Where Giannis does want to go, to our understanding, he is very much focused on the story and the arc of his professional career. That has been very apparent, as we've all known at this point, that Giannis and his preference on not requesting a trade, he has not wanted to have that terminology out there. He has not wanted to be positioned as someone who turned his back on this Bucks franchise and wanted to escape Milwaukee. That's been just as important to him, to my understanding, from talking to people around the situation, talking to people who are around Giannis Antetokounmpo and have some type of understanding of his thinking, that he's cared about the narrative structure and the characterization of his next situation just as much as this exit from Milwaukee. That's why going to New York in the fall first caught his eye, because every game at the Garden is a big moment, because the Knicks fan base turns that whole strip outside 7th Avenue into an absolute party following playoff games. The thought that he could be the final piece and the guy to finally end New York's long championship drought, just like he did in Milwaukee. All of that has been appealing to Giannis. Joining a young superstar in Anthony Edwards in Minnesota and helping the Wolves finally get past the Western Conference Finals after 2 straight trips there these last couple of years, and a long window. Anthony Edwards hasn't even entered his prime yet. So a long window working with him, bringing something, creating history in Minnesota that they have not achieved would certainly be a major storyline. In contrast, as we reported yesterday on the Stein Line, my joint Substack effort with the Hall of Famer Mark Stein, we have definitively received word as well that there is some type of reservation from Giannis about the idea of going to Golden State and kind of following in these similar footsteps of Kevin Durant, who has never shaken, you guys know this in the comments for sure, KD has never shaken the allegations of ring chasing and riding Steph Curry's coattails and what have you. That, coupled with the fact that Golden State will have to dump a lot of valuable stuff to go get him, and that Steph Curry is 36 years old, you're not going to have a 5-year, 6-year window competing for championships alongside Steph and Golden State like you theoretically would next to Anthony Edwards in Minnesota, next to Jalen Brunson in New York, next to Bam Adebayo in Miami. So all those factors here, to me, are just as important as what Milwaukee wants, as what the teams that are interested in Giannis are willing to put on the table, and what they are currently negotiating and withholding in their conversations with Milwaukee. But for now, we are still in a holding pattern and waiting to see what type of development could come from this major domino, the Giannis sweepstakes that everyone had been saying was holding up all of the trade activity until today, because we got an absolute flurry of action. We don't even have Jaren Jackson Jr. on our rundown here, but that was the biggest news to start of the day, and I'm sure we've got some questions about that in the chat because, yep, I've got Hayden right here saying, need my thoughts on the JJJ trade. What is going on there? Look, the Grizzlies, the second they entertained Ja Morant trade inquiries and put him on the market in earnest and advertised that publicly, we've been reporting and talking about it here that was going to encourage rival teams to call Memphis and try to pry Jaren Jackson Jr. free. So as we sifted through all of this, and it became very clear that Memphis does not have a robust market for Ja Morant and really hasn't all along, I think that only increased, clearly, Memphis's appetite for moving on from Jaren Jackson Jr. I had heard all along that it wasn't going to be Detroit, that it wasn't going to be Boston, but that Boston did have previous interest in Jaren Jackson in past years and past transaction cycles. Who was in Boston at that time? Current president of basketball operations in Utah, Austin Ainge, and the Utah Jazz have as big a draft pick cache as anyone. The Jazz have been not shy in the slightest about the fact that Utah wants to be competitive next year. Owner Ryan Smith has given every indication that the Jazz multi-year rebuild, playing the lottery year after year, which has not netted them a top pick. They are fortunate that Keontae George, and kudos to that coaching staff and the development staff in Utah, they're fortunate that their 16th pick in the draft a couple years ago has turned into a legitimate all-star candidate and really rounded into a real blue chip franchise cornerstone piece that they're now adding Jaren Jackson Jr. to. That's a piece of this too. If the Jazz weren't convinced that this Keontae George breakout is for real, they are not going out and splurging 3 unprotected first-round picks for Jaren Jackson Jr. I confirmed that news by way of multiple sources earlier today that the Utah Jazz were sending a 2027 most favorable pick between themselves, Minnesota, and Cleveland, those 2 picks that they got by way of Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert a few summers ago, and their own. That pick will be unprotected. The best pick of those 3 picks, that's going to Memphis next year. Then a 2027 first-round pick that Utah previously had from the Lakers. I believe that's from that 3-team deal with D'Angelo Russell and Mike Conley and Russell Westbrook from a couple years ago. That pick is top 4 protected from the Lakers, but there's no expectation right now that the Lakers with Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves and cap space next summer are going to be anywhere close to a lottery team a year ago. So that pick is basically a foregone conclusion as an unprotected pick going to Memphis as well. Then they get a 2031 unprotected pick from Phoenix, which is the pick you may recall the Suns sent to Utah around this time last year to break into 3 other firsts to give the Suns some more flexibility, and they used one of those to trade off Yusuf Nurkic to Charlotte, who then ironically went to Utah as well. Last thing here on the Jazz, they love playing multiple bigs, and I've been given every indication that Utah plans to play Lauri Markkanen and Jaren Jackson Jr. and their upcoming restricted free agent Walker Kessler all together on the lineup at once. But let's get back to our Chiron here, our regular scheduled programming with the Bulls, because the Bulls have done 2 significant moves today. I had been hearing that they were looking at moving Nikola Vucevic and attaching some draft capital to both find a potential young center of the future to replace Nikola Vucevic, who is in an expiring contract. They had past conversations with Boston about bringing Anthony Simons to Chicago in exchange for Nikola Vucevic. And just before we came live today, my buddy Keith Smith at Spotrac reported that the swap of second-round picks involved in this deal basically gives Chicago, in addition to Simons, it basically gives them a pick that's going to all but be guaranteed to be in the top 5 picks of this second round. So it's essentially a late first-round pick value going back to Chicago in exchange for Anthony Simons. And this achieves all the business Boston wanted to do. I've said this here. I've been writing this on the Stein line. The Celtics, they had multiple boxes to check at this deadline. They wanted to both get off of Anthony Simons' money, not that he's a bad player, but because they wanted to get under the first apron. They did not want to use a first-round pick to do so, and they were hoping to do that in a way that also brought back a starting center. They did that with Nikola Vucevic, who, if you are really up on the NBA rumors game, if you've been following Bleacher Report and our NBA Insider material dating back to when I was writing here in 2021, you'll remember that Boston was in at the end when Orlando was auctioning off Nikola Vucevic at the 2021 NBA trade deadline. That's when Boston just got Evan Fournier instead, but they were looking at getting both of those guys back then 5 years ago. A half decade later, Nikola Vucevic is now going to Boston, and he will fit in to that mix to be a real stretch shooting big man that fits the exact archetype of Kristaps Porzingis offensively. He's not the rim protector that KP was. That's the, of course, definitive question mark about Nikola Vucevic on defense and in the playoffs. But from the Chicago standpoint of things, this deal, Anthony Simons going to the Bulls, also comes in conjunction with a 3-team deal that Chicago struck with Detroit and Minnesota that brings in Mike Conley Jr., who by all accounts will likely be a buyout candidate, so he's not a factor in the crowded Bulls backcourt. But Jaden Ivey comes into the fold here with Chicago, as the Bulls are already and have already been navigating the trade landscape for both Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu. I have certainly heard of ongoing trade talks from Chicago about both of Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu. We will see, and we will continue to monitor, and I'm continuing to make calls and texts about both those players to see what will transpire here. But without a doubt, everyone around the NBA, agents around the NBA, they're all looking at something to break free of the Chicago backcourt, because after paying Josh Giddey in restricted free agency, now bringing in Jaden Ivey and Anthony Simons, right now, my current indication is that the Bulls are looking to keep Anthony Simons. So we'll see how they can, they just truly can't afford all 4 of Jaden Ivey, Anthony Simons, Kobe White, and Ayo Dosunmu both having those guys are all impending free agents, so they're not going to be able to keep that whole batch of ball handlers. That's something that we're going to probably be talking to you tomorrow when we come back on this show later on at 5 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Back to the chat. Zeke1534 says, will the Bulls please trade Conley to Memphis so he can retire in the grindhouse? For the Grizzlies, I don't know how exactly that deal would make sense for them. Conley was a salary dump, so they would need to figure out compensation. But Conley's going to most likely get bought out and end up in a playoff contender. We just talked about ongoing trade talks, goes 316, about Chicago having a ton of guards. So no more really to talk about there. There's definitely Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu conversations happening around the league. Nate Arrington asking, what about Houston? I have not heard the Rockets are actively involved in anything right now. Not Kobe White, not Ayo Dosunmu, not anything else. I think the Rockets are definitely standing pat at this juncture. The other leftover piece of Cleveland and their conversations with James Harden for Darius Garland is the fact that, again, I keep getting consistent word that Cleveland is not like actively trying to move Darius Garland. This James Harden thing is really the only dynamic that we're monitoring for Garland and his potential exit in Cleveland. All the word that I've heard about Cleveland's continued salary restructuring after moving DeAndre Hunter to Sacramento and bringing back Dennis Schroeder and Keon Ellis has been about Lonzo Ball and the Cavaliers working through their options to move off of his $10 million salary. There's been some conversation with Washington to try to offload him there, but to me, the most interesting dynamic is that we've definitely heard, and I've confirmed via multiple sources, that there's at least been some preliminary conversation between Charlotte and Cleveland, with the Cavaliers compensating the Hornets with multiple second-round picks to bring Lonzo Ball to his brother LaMelo Ball's franchise. That would be a salary dump just like any other from a structural standpoint, from a business standpoint. But beyond the framework, of course, it would be super cool to see LaMelo and Lonzo play together in the NBA after everything that's transpired over the last couple of years, with Lonzo finally getting back healthy on the floor. He just hasn't really turned into a key member of the Cavaliers rotation this season, unfortunately, and that is why we are seeing him thrust into the middle of trade dump, salary clearing situations, and him going to Charlotte would just be a different dynamic compared to any other real salary dump that we're kind of monitoring. It'd be way different than Mike Conley going to Chicago, for example. And let's get back to the chat here. Are the Wolves going for Giannis or Ja? Laraste Pimpin is asking. The Wolves are going for Giannis. We have not heard that Ja Morant has really ever been a target for Minnesota all along. I don't think they're looking at James Harden right now either. The Wolves, by various accounts, are very much pursuing Giannis Antetokounmpo right now. The New York Knicks, by contrast, I have not heard are super active in their efforts to get Giannis Antetokounmpo. New York, of course, knows and was trying to bring Giannis Antetokounmpo in the fall when they knew that he had absolute interest in joining the Knicks. We talked about it earlier. By all accounts, we have heard that the Knicks are a very appealing destination for Giannis, playing in Madison Square Garden, trying to help end a title drought that's lasted decades in New York. But without the draft capital that Milwaukee is looking for, without a real blue chip prospect, look, Golden State's got 4 first-round picks and Jonathan Kuminga. The Timberwolves have Jaden McDaniels, the best blue chip prospect currently on the board. The Miami Heat, their package of Tyler Hero and Khalil Ware and a couple of draft picks and who else, that's kind of more of a middle ground in terms of blue chip prospects and draft capital. The Knicks don't really factor anywhere into that in terms of stuff that Milwaukee would really like. So I don't think New York is really too active right now trying to make this happen. I think it's more of a potential offseason thing. There are plenty of teams that are hoping that Giannis holds off on a trade until this summer. Teams like at the top of their conference, the Spurs, the Rockets, the Thunder, the Nuggets, who are not really making major moves, they don't want to see Giannis come to the West. They don't want to see him go to Golden State or Minnesota. New York definitely would prefer if Giannis is not moved right now and looms as a potential upgrade for them this summer, following however their postseason unfolds. Everything out of New York still seems to center around their efforts looking to flip Gershon Yabusele into more depth and more rotational improvements compared to a top-level, top-line addition. But for now, I'd say the trade market really focuses for Giannis on Golden State, Minnesota, and Miami. The Heat's potential approach for Giannis Antetokounmpo did have a major development yesterday when a judge ruled that Terry Rozier, whose salary has been in escrow and withheld from him while he's on suspension from the league during this ongoing FBI probe into gambling allegations across the NBA, he is now going to be paid his $26.5 million salary, winning that grievance against the NBA. So what does that mean for Terry in Miami, aside from him getting paid? Well, the league has not given any indication to this point whether or not the Heat would be legally allowed to trade Terry Rozier's salary for Giannis Antetokounmpo or anybody else. So this ruling would certainly lend some credence to the fact that it would be very hard for the league to forbid Miami from including Terry Rozier's salary in a trade for pure salary matching standpoints, because now it basically functions as him being an injured player in a deal, which happens all the time. So if an independent third party ruled that Terry Rozier can't have his salary withheld during all this, I don't see how the NBA would have a leg to stand on in preventing Miami from using his salary. So does that open up some more flexibility? For example, all these trade talks, go back to Cleveland and their deal for Keon Ellis. There's always this, hemming and hawing about the money going back and forth. So there was some concepts being discussed between Sacramento and Cleveland about Malik Monk going to going to Cleveland instead of Dennis Schroeder, right? And depending on the certain salary structures that change hands and what have you, those always impact the protections on picks, the quality of picks. So when it comes to Miami and their pursuit of Giannis Antetokounmpo, Andrew Wiggins, his roughly $28 million salary comes with a player option for next season. Terry Rozier's roughly $27 million salary is just a straight expiring contract. So that would potentially give Miami some more flexibility in appeasing Milwaukee's wishes to make sure that something could get done and bring Giannis to South Beach if they do end up having the ultimate package that strikes Milwaukee's fancy the most. To close out today's show, we're going to round out through a lot of the chats that we've been compiling up here right now. C. Wiley5 says, will the Hawks be active at the deadline if they are trying to win or lose? I think the Hawks, as evidenced by the Vit Krejci trade from earlier from this weekend, the Hawks are in more of a asset collection, maintain flexibility, see what stuff they can do this summer mode. For sure, they were looking at what Kristaps Porzingis' expiring salary and Luke Kennard could bring them. That's why they were involved on Anthony Davis talks in the beginning of the year. But after trading Trae Young, after the Hawks have still kind of sputtered in the middle of the play-in tournament, I've been given every indication that Atlanta is not looking to aggressively get better here. I think they are certainly involved in trade talks around the league, and they're keeping an eye on making some moves that would give them more draft capital, more financial flexibility this summer. But they are not buyers to an aggressive extent, really at all, to my understanding at this juncture. Maybe they would be from like a low cost, a young piece that could come in the door, but they're not looking at an Anthony Davis or a James Harden or anything like that. God Prince asks, do I think the Warriors still have the best chance to get Giannis? At this point, all this momentum, it seems like Minnesota does. And we've written this. I've heard that internally Milwaukee values Minnesota's potential package and Miami's potential package more than Golden State. Ask the Fan wants to know any BK news, any Nets news, salary dumps, MPJ. We're still being told that the Nets are not actively shopping Michael Porter Jr. and we're not expecting a Michael Porter Jr. trade by any stretch right now. They're definitely in the mix for salary dump stuff, but hasn't come up right now. And we're looking at a Cam Thomas trade. The Milwaukee Bucks are like the one team that we really are looking at to be a potential Cam Thomas absorber. The Bucks are in a position to take a flyer and a gamble on someone like him as they are navigating all the Giannis stuff. Heat 2024 is saying, or asking, does Miami have any traction on Morant deal? Not to my knowledge right now, and I've always been told that the Heat are only really looking at a buy low situation for Ja Morant. But I have heard that the Grizzlies' asking price for Morant only continues to fall. Anything on the Pelicans, New Orleans still looms as a team that has interest in Benedict Mathurin, to my understanding, and they are still feeling trade interest on Yves Missi. Cool Kid 7246 is asking, Is Sacramento done? I think largely, but there's still an opportunity to move Domantas Sabonis to Toronto, from my understanding. And our last chat here from NKA1, anything more for Detroit? I really don't think so. I mean, the Pistons were always saying all along that they were not going big game hunting, that they were just going to be opportunistic, have an ear open for potential chances to improve, and they basically got another sharpshooter to surround Cade Cunningham and Kevin Huerter for just the price of taking on Dario Saric's expiring contract. They part with Jaden Ivey in that deal as well, but it's been clear for a long time that the Pistons did not have long plans for Ivey to be in their rotation and really part of this organization altogether. So this was something that I think Ivey was prepared for, that the Pistons were prepared for, and him heading out the door for Kevin Huerter puts them in a position to also have money fall off their books. Last thing here from Cash is King 740 Lakers. What are they doing? Again, the Lakers are being super pragmatic right now in looking at ways to improve on the perimeter, but not sacrificing their upcoming cap space and financial flexibility moving forward. So that will do it for today's show. We really appreciate the chat. We really appreciate all of you tuning in. And please come back tomorrow, Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, for another roundup of all things NBA trade deadline right here on the one and only Bleacher Report app. Thank you so much. See ya.